Мы купили максимально ближайший город, билет, минеральные воды.
So we bought train tickets to to one of the closest cities to Georgia, to the crossing into Georgia.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, more highlights from our special series on the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine. Well, while the conflict has cast an uneasy shadow over Eastern Europe, the lives of Russians and Ukrainians in New York's capital region remain intertwined and peaceful. WAMC's Capital Region Bureau Chief Dave Lucas has our story.
Anton Konev left Russia in 1997. The former Albany Common Councilor still has family in the area of Donetsk, which is part of present-day Russian-occupied territory in Ukraine. Konev offers his take on what moved Vladimir Putin to go to war.
Putin is flexing his imperial muscle. He believes that Ukraine is his fiefdom, and that they need to be part of Russia once again. So it started off with Crimea, went into Donetsk and Luhansk, the two independent regions, and then somehow nobody expected this, that a year ago he would send troops stopping shortly before reaching Kiev, capital of Ukraine. And nobody expected him to annex farther regions than Donetsk and Luhansk. But that's what happened.
Konev says the folks back home are in shock and want the war to end. 27-year-old Saman Shlokov has been in the U.S. for nearly 4 months. Konev interprets on his behalf Shlokov is a Russian patriot who believes Putin is carrying out genocide against the Ukrainian people.
My mom and my little brother are still in Moscow, and I have classmates and friends also in both Russia and Ukraine.
Shlokov's journey to America took a month and a half. The conflict pushed airfare to unaffordable heights in Russia, so Shlokov went by land via train, car, and foot.
Мы купили максимально ближайший город, билет, минеральные воды.
So we bought train tickets to one of the closest cities to Georgia, to the crossing into Georgia. And then we took a car from that city to reach the actual border. It was very difficult because we were stopped several times on our way, and the customs people were making fun of us that you're leaving, you're young people, you should be sent to fight for your country, and you're betraying your country, you're leaving it. They left the car and then they walked for about 6 hours to reach the border because there was a line of cars. So they had to leave the car because you couldn't, the line of cars was several days long. So they left it and they walked to the border, and crossing the border, and they waited in line for another 6 hours. So it was like 12 hours to cross the border.
Shlokov was concerned as there was a Russian military vehicle station right next to the border. He later discovered it was a pop-up or mobile drafting station where young men trying to cross the border were diverted to become soldiers. He somehow managed to pass by into Georgia without being stopped, eventually traveling by air to Mexico.
Вы даже не представляете, насколько.
And later on from the news, we did find out that it was the drafting station, that the mobile drafting station, that they just moved there to draft people straight from the border. And we sort of just escaped that drafting station from drafting us.
3 дня я был в бордере, и потом 4 дня я был в detention.
And then he had to go from Georgia to Mexico, across the border to the detention, 3 days in the detention, 3 дня в detention. 3 days he was in a border station, and then another 4 days in detention, so it's like 7 days in detention.
Shlokov is in Albany, currently seeking asylum in the U.S. Oleg Bogoshlovsky was born in Moscow 55 years ago. He left for the United States when Putin took power and has never been a fan.
From beginning, he showed who is it. He took all businesses from people. He took all free channels from people. He destroyed everybody who was against of him, and Right now, he's probably like richest man in the world because every money going to him, and because he's from KGB and from Russian criminal, so it's bad mix.
Boguslavsky has authored anti-war and anti-Putin regime songs. Now a U.S. citizen, Boguslavsky says he'll never go back to Russia because he would likely be arrested immediately. Modern technology helps him keep in touch with friends and family.
I got a lot of friends. Some friends was before like pro-Putin's, and after I talked to them a lot, and actually we start going to meetings, and all this stuff. So people who understand what's going on and they can't do anything, that's very bad. We have to talk here too. A lot of people in America support Putin too.
The Albany-Tula Alliance is a sister city partnership Albany has had with Tula, Russia, since 1991. Since the war began, the alliance has been in limbo. Sonia Stark is the organization's Public Relations Committee chair and vice chair.
Currently, the entire organization is we're in a moment of suspension. We're currently not a lot of our membership. How do I put this? It's like with the seriousness of the situation between Russia and Ukraine, the ATAs, we voted unanimously to suspend all of our activities for the foreseeable future. It's unfortunate because we were making a lot of progress. Last year was to be our 30th year anniversary. And, we've been dedicated to citizen diplomacy and the collaboration, the dialogue with the people in Tula for 30 straight years. And we've made considerable progress and what we consider a foundation of peace and understanding when it came to differences in culture and tradition and in different business expectations and education and health.
Stark says the organization has but a handful of members left, and there is concern for the safety of alliance members who live in Tula. She hopes that one day the alliance will again flourish and that it will include Albany's new sister city in Ukraine, Bucha. Mayor Kathy Sheehan welcomed her counterpart from Bucha, Mayor Anatoly Fedoruk, to Albany City Hall on February 6th.
What you have experienced in Bucha, none of us can fully comprehend. You have lost not only property and infrastructure and schools and institutions, but you have lost countless human lives. The war crimes committed by Russia on the good people of Bucha have entered the annals of some of the darkest atrocities of humankind. There is not a mayor in this country who has experienced what you are living, but as the mayor of the capital of the state of New York, I want to assure you that you are not alone. That is why I am signing with you a memorandum of understanding between our two cities to create a bond between us that we hope will lead to brighter days ahead for Bucha.
Fedoruk and Sheehan signed the memorandum. He spoke through an interpreter about the war and its challenges.
And I would like to emphasize once again that this is not the war between Ukraine and Russia, but the war between the civilizations, which is happening right now in Ukraine. But along with all of the challenges we are currently facing in Ukraine, it is beyond important for us to establish the relationship between the municipalities from different parts of the world.
Stark is hopeful that Tula, Albany, and Bucha can band together someday when the war is over.
We could showcase the relationship between our members and the new sister city, the members of the new sister city. I think we could collaborate, and we can show case how peace and, harmony can coexist in our country. Maybe not so much in theirs, but definitely in ours.
Dave Lucas, WAMC News.
Early on in the war, the expectation was it would all be over in a few weeks. Instead, the war has ground on for a year. It's been a disaster for Russia and a tragedy for Ukraine. For a look at some of the geopolitical repercussions, here's our Pioneer Valley Bureau Chief Paul Tuthill.
What caused the war? Why did Vladimir Putin invade Ukraine?
I could not answer this question a year ago. I can't answer it now. And furthermore, I don't think any person, any expert, whatever, could answer that question for you.
I put that question to Konstantin Pleshakov. He was born in Ukraine, spent 20 years in Moscow working for a Russian government think tank. For the past 25 years, he's lived in Western Massachusetts and currently teaches political science at Amherst College. Pleshakov has published several books about war, revolution, and international relations in the 20th century, focusing on Russia and Eastern Europe.
Rationally speaking, there was no objective in what Putin did and in what he is doing. And that's the most scary thing to me about this war. No matter how aggressive, evil your opponent is, as long as they are thinking rationally, selfishly, wanting to hurt other nations, sure. But if it makes sense, then you can sort of see where things could be going. But what's really puzzling about this war, there was no gain for Putin or for Russian ruling class to be gotten from that war. And if there is no gain, this means, there is no objective.
Speculation that Putin is somehow trying to reassemble the old Soviet Union does not make sense, said Pleshakov.
I don't even know why people say that Putin wants to reestablish the Soviet Union. He wants Russia to expand. He wants to expand Russia's borders for sure. But that has nothing to do with the Soviet past.
The war has had enormous ramifications on Russia's relationships with the former Soviet states, not to mention its relations with the European Union, the United States, and China, said Stephen Jones, professor emeritus of Russian Studies at Mount Holyoke College and director of the Georgian Studies program at Harvard.
This is an enormous global crisis. Of course, we have many global crises now, the latest being in Turkey, but this one is going to have extraordinary geopolitical ramifications, and we've already seen these massive population movements as well as a result, migration into Europe, into Poland, into Central Asia, into the South Caucasus. So we don't know what the long-term effects of that migration will be. People may go back to Russia. Ukrainians certainly will want to come back home to Ukraine when the war is over. But these massive population movements, we have to think about what the consequences of that will be.
Putin has portrayed the war in Ukraine as Russia fighting against Western aggression. A majority of Russians appear to be buying that. Domestically, Putin's position appears pretty secure right now, said Jones.
We equivocated around, in the early 2000s, up to 2014, perhaps, and considered Russia sort of a hybrid state, semi-democratic, and were open spaces where dissent could take place. The elections took place, and sometimes the opposition got into parliament. We were sort of thinking, okay, all right, it's not a democracy, but, it's somewhere in between. But that's completely changed. It's now it's an authoritarian state with complete control over society. That means it has complete control over the means of information, and the Russian people are just receiving propaganda and no alternatives. Even on the internet, it's very hard for ordinary Russians, most of whom do not use the internet, by the way. But it's very hard for them to get any alternative sources of information.
Dissenters to the war have not taken to the streets in Russia to protest, but instead have left the country.
It's a really damaging outcome for Russia because not only are they losing their young men on the front line in Ukraine, but they're also losing their young professionals, those people who generate business, some sort of economic dynamism and growth in the economy, and they are disappearing. They're leaving.
The military blunders and miscalculations by Russia in the war with Ukraine have weakened Putin, believes Pleshakov.
Because on the surface, he looks like a dictator who controls everything in the country. But I think that his absolutely mindless handling of this war has made him a really weak leader.
The European Union, with a few exceptions, notably Hungary, has solidly supported Ukraine for the last 12 months, said Jones.
So it's not what Putin expected in the case of Europe, but most of the 27 countries that make up the European Union have really shown quite considerable solidarity in that respect.
Economic sanctions intended to punish Russia and choke off the resources it needs to wage war have not so far worked. Russia found new markets in China and India for its exports of oil and gas. But Jones believes eventually Russia's domestic economy will be severely impacted.
Quite apart from the oil and gas, so many Western companies have pulled out. Russia's been able to plug the gap to some degree, but the future looks bleak for the Russian economy. And this is why I'm thinking of a scenario in which we might just see some real economic and therefore political crisis in Russia that will really threaten the system of Putinism.
One positive from the war is that because of the cutoff of Russian natural gas, European countries have accelerated conversions to renewable energy sources. 1 year after Russia invaded Ukraine, there is no clue about how the war might end, said Pleshakov.
There is no good outcome for Russia in this war. No territorial grab can be lasting, and so in that situation, what kind of how do we bring how can this war end? At the same time, we know that Ukrainians, no matter how horrible the situation all over Ukraine is, the majority of Ukrainians are still willing to fight till the victory. And as of now, the victory to them means kicking Russia out.
With Russia apparently preparing for an offensive in the spring, the question may come down to how long can Ukrainians hold out?
That's the question I'm asking myself too, because no matter how united and brave the people of Ukraine are, they are under immense pressure, and the hardship is horrible. And of course, that's what Putin is hoping for, that at some point the hardship will become too much for the Ukrainian people and they will sue for peace.
Whatever political solution eventually ends the war, Jones said it will have to be carefully crafted to avoid resentments and humiliations that could lead to another war. Reporting from WAMC's Pioneer Valley News Bureau on the campus of Western New England University, I'm Paul Tuthill.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks to Dave Lucas and Paul Tuthill for their reporting. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.